going to talk about how I believe this impacts religious life. So when you think about the first manifestations of religious community, the first manifestations were for the perpetuation of the empire, basically. Cathedrals were built at the intersection of all the markets as a way of helping people connect to the message the culture wanted them to receive. It was not their purpose to create intimate religious community. That was not their purpose. It was to transmit a dogma. And they did that in the most cost-efficient way, which was to have these big cathedrals in which they could transmit that particular dogma. And then as people began to develop communities outside of the urban areas, they could gather in smaller congregations or churches like this that were mostly based on who was in your community. They weren't necessarily about a particular religious message, right? So you could live in a community where the main church, the only church, was a Methodist church, and it really didn't almost matter because that was the community church. And people went to it because it was a way that they could connect culturally in their isolated lives. And so the connection among people became much more important than the dogma, than the message. And then with the advent of a diverse culture, people began to find congregations to be places where they could connect with their own culture, to be where they could remind themselves that they came from somewhere, that somebody else recognized them, that spoke their same language. So this is actually a picture of Fall River, Massachusetts. I don't know if you can see. There are at least 14 churches in this small industrial town. Now, why did they need 14 churches in a small industrial town? Because they had that many different cultures that were trying to represent themselves. So my ancestors came from Germany in the 1850s, settled in a small Texas town that already had German-speaking people that were Lutheran. My family were Lutheran emigres. But my family were Wendish Lutherans. And so they established their own church right across the street from the other Lutheran church in town that still exists. And they still never cross the street. They hardly ever show themselves in one of those churches. And they're both Lutheran. That's about nothing other than cultural identity, where people get to see their culture reflected back to them. Well, as people began to get more integrated into the larger culture, they did not find the need to do that anymore. So every single one of these churches in Fall River no longer exists except for 2. You see how that works? How that impact of a cultural change that's not necessarily about religion. It's about culture. It's about how culture impacts the way in which people worship. Now we have modern manifestations like this, which make me look, it's like a combination Apple store and a church, in which people are obviously trying to find a modern representation to try to tell people, okay, this is a way you can have your modern lifestyle reflected. These churches are not working. They are not working. I don't know if you saw the slide that Peter put up today, but all mainline religions are hemorrhaging members, and evangelical churches are losing members. The only denomination that's growing is the Mormons, because they're so aggressively evangelical, and non-denominational churches. It's the only ones that are growing at this point. Us, just a tiny bit. And of course, what we're trying to avoid, this is a poorly lit picture, but it's actually an abandoned congregation, abandoned church building. Now you can kind of see how this progression may lead inexorably to that. At what point does that kind of representation of religious community become obsolete? I don't think it has to. I want to be really clear. I do not think it has to be obsolete. But in order for it to be relevant right now, we have to make it speak to the needs of people in this time with this kind of cultural change. So congregations can still be vital. People still want to gather in religious community. Congregations can still be profound places for community and religious development. And people can find many other ways to find their religious needs met right now. Many other ways. So if you Google worship, the number one picture that comes up is this. A solitary person on the top of a mountainside. So what that means is that this is the majority of people's interpretation of what worship means. You have to go way down the list. Anybody who's done Google Images will know what I'm talking about. You have to go way down on the page to begin to find something other than solitary spiritual experience. Which says something, right, about how people understand religious experience. A lot of people find their religious experiences met, their spiritual experiences met through social service. The millennial generation is the first generation that 100% of them experienced the absolute requirement to do social service in their schools. I did not grow up with that. I did not grow up with I did it because it was part of my family's expectation and a part of my church's expectation as a Unitarian Universalist. But it was not a part of the culture's expectation. Now it is. And so people have profound experiences doing things for others. And they find that to be often a good alternative to church. There are ways in which people are making their own small group experiences something that can be profound for them without having to organize it through a church. How many of you do Meetup? So Meetup is an online process that was established after 9/11. A guy in New York said, we need to find other ways to build community. And so he established this platform where all you have to do is sign up, create a profile of yourself, and say, I'm really interested in photography. I'm really interested in canoeing. I'm really interested in religion. I'm really interested in cooking. And you can create your own group, and total strangers can say, I'm really interested in that too. Let's create a group. So there's no need for other kinds of social fabrics other than that. If people want to get together with total strangers, they can create community by themselves in these kinds of settings. And often find them to be profound experiences. They can experience online worship profoundly. Now, I have to say I was really suspicious about this. I didn't like the idea of online worship. When Church of the Larger Fellowship started to do online worship, it took me about 3 months before I could make myself watch it. Not because I have anything against Church of the Larger Fellowship. I love Church of the Larger Fellowship, but I just found the idea of it and the first time I watched it, I actually started to cry. Because the very beginning of it, they have a chat stream that happens alongside. And at the very beginning of it, it says, we're lighting the chalice in Minneapolis. We're lighting the chalice in Texas. We're lighting the chalice in Switzerland. Lighting the chalice in Ghana. Lighting the chalice in Haiti. And there's just an immediate connection to this broad community of people who come together because they love Unitarian Universalism. It's a really moving experience. I commend it to you.